Hey everybody, this is Maxine Taylor with my Trumpology report, and I understand the first try at this didn't quite deliver. We're going to blame it on Mercury, and we're going to do it again. This particular Trumpology report is about the conflict last night between Meryl Streep and Donald Trump. Now, for those of you who are aware of what went on, it was during the Golden Globes Awards when Meryl Streep was given the Cecil B. DeMille Lifetime Achievement Award. And from the podium, she, without mentioning his name, took Donald Trump to task. And she said, the one performance this year, I'm reading it to make sure I got it right, the one performance this year that stunned me and sank its hooks into my heart. That's what she talked about. And she was referring to Trump's mocking of Serge Kowalski, a disabled New York Times reporter. This video, the actual video of Trump doing that, played this morning on Good Morning America. Trump, of course, fired back with 3 tweets calling Meryl Streep an underrated actress and a Hillary flunky. An overrated actress and a Hillary flunky. So I thought it would be interesting to see what is going on between the two of them. First of all, the comparisons that I'm doing now are very short and very bottom line. A real comparison between two people goes into great detail, but I'm bottom lining it for you so that even those of you who don't understand anything about astrology will be able to understand what I'm saying here. It's really incredible. First of all, I want to hold up the 2 charts. Okay, in the inner wheel, this is Meryl Streep's chart, and this is Donald Trump's chart. And you can see that the house placement is very, very similar. When I say the house placement, what I'm talking about is the horoscope is divided into 12 segments. Each segment is called a house. Each house deals with a different area of life. No matter what the planets might be, if, for example, you have planets in the 10th house of career, doesn't matter what the planets are, and you meet somebody else who has planets in their 10th house of career, you have a natural understanding of one another when it comes to career. And so you can see, just by looking, Donald Trump and Meryl Streep both have 10th house planets, which means they have an understanding of career. Their concept is that career is important. They have planets in the 11th house of friends and group activities and humanitarian activities. They have planets in the 12th house of behind-the-scenes activities. They have planets in the 2nd house of money, in the 4th house of home and family, and in the 5th house of fun and games and creativity and showmanship and movies and all that good stuff. In fact, let me give you a list here of similarities that are amazing. Their sun, Meryl Streep's sun, is in Cancer, but it's in very early Cancer. Trump's sun is in Gemini. They're sitting on top of each other. And when you have the egos involved, there is a certain understanding of each other, even though they are in different signs. They're right on top of each other. He has his Venus, which is love, in Cancer, the nurturing sign. Meryl Streep has her Venus in Cancer. Isn't it wild? Trump's ascendant is 29 degrees and 58 minutes of Leo. That means there are only 2 more minutes, and it would have been in Virgo. I think the fact that his whole 1st house is in Virgo is why he is so sensitive to criticism. Meryl Streep has a Leo ascendant. It's a much earlier Leo ascendant, but they understand each other. The ascendant is the most personal part in the chart. Trump's North Node the area of greatest fulfillment, is in his 10th house. The South Node, the area that he has mastered in past lives, is in his 4th house. 10th house is career, 4th house is home, family, and real estate. Guess who else has the same configuration? Meryl Streep. Trump has 3 planets in his 11th house of friends and group activities. Meryl Streep has 4 planets in her 11th house of friends and group activities and humanitarian projects. Trump has 2 planets in his 12th house of behind-the-scenes activities. Meryl Streep has 1. Again, they're like, when you have planets in the 10th house, you are a disguised Capricorn. In the 11th, you're a disguised Aquarian. In the 12th, you're a disguised Pisces. They have this in common. Each one of them has their vertex, their karmic role in life, in the 5th house of gamesmanship, fun and games and entertainment and children. These are areas that are very important to both of these people. Now, the part that really just nails it for me. Trump has his sun, the ego, conjunct Uranus, the rebel. Meryl Streep has the same thing. So you can see the similarities between them. And I'm going to go into detail on this right now. Let me grab the actual, sure enough, charts. They look like this. I don't know if you can see them. That's a little complicated to try and explain in a brief video. So let me just use the simplified charts. Here we go. Let's start with Donald Trump. All right. Can you see this okay? I hope you can. I'll just kind of scoot around here. Okay. Meryl Streep's planets are on the outermost wheel. Donald Trump's planets are on the inner wheel. Let's start over here. Meryl Streep's Mars, which is anger and passion, sits on Donald Trump's Uranus, the rebel, the explosive one. And so she fires him up. She gets him angry. She certainly does. Mercury, communication. Meryl Streep's Mercury, what she says, triggers the rebel in Donald Trump. There you go. Isn't that what keeps happening with them? Her Mercury sits on his North Node. And so what she says can actually help his public image. His sun, her sun, her ego in the 11th house triggers his area of friendship and group activities. It sits on his North Node. This enhances his public image. Her sun also sits on his sun, so she fires up his ego. She lights up his ego. Her sun sits on his Mercury, so she fires up his communication. I mean, there's so much going on there. Excuse me. Her Uranus, the rebel, sits on his Mercury. And so they both are so rebellious verbally with each other. Her Uranus, okay, on his Mercury. Her Venus, love, beauty, even money, sits on his Mercury. And a Venus-Mercury conjunction indicates lovely words, loving thoughts. Her Venus on his Saturn. Saturn is reality. And so she can bring a serious note. I mean, she can bring love to what he takes as a very serious note. When two people have a Venus-Saturn conjunction, they take the relationship very seriously. And as I said, her Venus is on his Venus. This is a loving connection, particularly since they have their Venus in Cancer, which is very nurturing. Okay. Her ascendant, that's the most personal point in the chart, sits on his Pluto in the 12th house. Pluto is control. It's also transformation. But in this case, what she fires up is his desire to be in control. Her Pluto sits on his Pluto because they're both in the same karmic group. And so they trigger each other's need to be in control. Now, her Saturn, the planet of reality and authority, sits on his ascendant. So she is the authority in that case. And that is what bothers him, as well as everything else I've talked about. Also, it can squelch the person. It forces the person, if you're in a relationship and somebody's Saturn is on your ascendant, you've got to grow up. You've got to deal with them as an adult. And her Saturn sits on his Mars. Mars is anger. Mars is passion, and it holds it down. Her Neptune and South Node, Neptune is the dream, the wishful thinking, is on his Jupiter. So she has him thinking of lots of great ideas. But her South, this is in his second house of money. So it can be ideas about money. It can be money itself. And she can fill visions of sugar plums, so to speak. But with her South Node on his Jupiter, there can be financial drain. Now, her vertex sits on his Moon South Node. The vertex is your karmic role in life. And the moon in the fourth house is very emotionally attached to home and family and very protective of itself. The South Node can be the area of drain, leakage, draining of energy if you spend too much time there. And her vertex is what triggers that. Her Jupiter sits on his vertex. Jupiter is the great expansive planet. It brings blessings galore, and it helps him really shine in gambling, in TV and movies. So this can be very beneficial to him. Her midheaven, which is the top of the chart, this is the point of authority and popularity, sits in his 8th house. And so her authority triggers his 8th house. 8th house is the house of other people's money, transformation, but it's secrets. And so she is bringing her authority to bear on secrets in his life. And her North Node and Moon are sitting on his midheaven. The Moon is change. And so she can bring about change in his public image. Okay, now let's reverse this and talk about what Trump triggers in Meryl Streep's chart. Okay. His midheaven sits on her Moon. Now, the Moon is changeable. The Moon deals with the public. She has the North Node in her 10th house. She just got the Lifetime Achievement Award at the Golden Globes. I would say she deals quite well with the public. But he can influence her public image, needless to say. His Uranus, the rebel, explosiveness, inventiveness, sits on her Mars. And this is where the explosiveness between the two of them shows up very strongly. His Uranus is on her Mercury. And what he does is he triggers rebellious speech in her and rebellious action in her. That's exactly what we saw. Now, okay, I'm looking at this sideways, of course. His Mercury sits on her Uranus, and so his words trigger her rebellion. So it's communication, rebellion, anger from chart to chart. His Saturn, his Mercury sits on her Venus. Again, there can be loving words. Saturn sits on her Venus, and so he is going to try and tone down her subconscious feelings of love and happiness, and he can do that. But that's also the serious relationship. And with his Venus on her Venus, this is a loving relationship. This could be friendship. Not so much with all of that anger triggered, needless to say. Now, his Pluto sits on her ascendant and on her Pluto, and so he controls her. Now, remember, her Saturn sits on his ascendant, so she holds him down. The desire to be in control is what each of them is feeling. His Mars, action, sits on her Saturn in her 2nd house. And Saturn is the authority figure, and so he's fighting the authority figure. But Saturn's in her 2nd house of money, and he can fire up her ability to be in charge financially. His ascendant sits on her Saturn, and so there can be some issue with her money that he brings about just by the relationship itself. Their Neptunes are conjunct simply because they're in the same karmic group, and his Jupiter is on her Neptune. Jupiter expands her inspiration, divine inspiration. She may be writing a screenplay about this even as we speak right now. His moon south node sits on her vertex. It can change her acting. It can change the type of dramas she does. And the south node there can literally drain not the talent. She is certainly talented, but the energy she puts into her talent. His vertex is on her Jupiter, which means he can expand her work. He can influence it very favorably. So, don't you think this is absolutely fascinating? I do. You've got the picture. You know what's going on. Stay tuned. I'm going to be doing more of these reports, and hopefully they will get on YouTube the first time. So, until we meet again, until my next Trumpology report, may the stars shine brightly on you and yours.